This is Rudkowski of wearechange.org, and I have the distinct, amazing honor and pleasure to be joined by John Perkins, author of Economic Hitman, and also, most importantly, a whistleblower who whistleblowed on the darkest, craziest stuff that I've ever heard before, exposed by an individual. Now, for the few individuals who may not know of your work, can you just give us a synopsis of where you came from and what you had to go through?
Okay, well, yes, I was officially chief economist at a major consulting firm, Charles D. Main. It no longer exists, but it was very powerful at the time. Better known as an economic hitman. And what my job was, essentially, was to identify countries with resources our corporations covet, like oil, arrange huge loans to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations. But the money never actually went to the country. Instead, it went to our own corporations to build big infrastructure projects in the country. Power plants, roads, industrial parks, things that benefited few wealthy people in the country, as well as our own corporations, who were the main beneficiaries, but didn't help the majority of the people. Too poor to buy electricity, couldn't get jobs in industrial parks because they don't hire many people. And yet the whole country was left holding a huge debt that it couldn't repay. So at some point we go back and say, since you can't pay your debts, sell your resource, whatever it is, oil, whatever the resource is, real cheap to our organizations, to our corporations, without any environmental restrictions or social regulations, or sell off all of your public sector things like your utility companies, water and sewage, electricity, schools, so on, to our corporations. In other words, become a slave of the corporations, the global corporations. And when we failed, the jackals would step in, people who would either overthrow governments or assassinate their leaders.
And obviously there was a lot of manipulation, there was a lot of coy, there was a lot of just misdoings by the very few, kind of like a cabal of corporate banking and governmental powers that pretty much caused the worst of the worst for a lot of human beings in this world. Looking at the situation right now in Ukraine, it kind of has those same exact fingerprints. They did discover a lot of fracking possibilities in Ukraine, especially in that Donetsk area. There was a lot of national resources there. A lot of farming that has been taken over by Monsanto. The IMF and World Bank have their fingerprints all over it. What is your understanding of the current geopolitical situation when it comes to Ukraine with everything that you know?
Well, you're right. Ukraine is a place that Monsanto very much wants to sink its teeth into. It's got some of the richest agricultural lands in that part of the world. And it's become like the line in the sand in a way, you know. We basically made a commitment, we being the United States and Europe, not to extend NATO, but we're extending, it's extending, and the Russians don't like this. And so Obama drew a line in the sand, and Putin crossed it, and we basically didn't do anything except make a lot of noise. So, you know, it's almost like the epitome of this new Cold War that's evolving. I was recently in Romania, and I was right up at the border with Ukraine, and the people there are very terrified that something similar is going to happen. In fact, they just jailed their prime minister on corruption charges, but some of that's tied in with all of this too. So we see this building kind of Cold War, and the Russians are flirting with the Chinese, and to a large degree, it's a reaction against the terrible mistakes that the United States and our corporations made at the end of the Soviet Union. After 1991, the United States and our allies had an incredible opportunity to go out and do really good things in the world, take a real leadership role, creating a sustainable world and a socially just world, and we didn't do it. Instead, we went out and exploited the world. And the world knows this. You know, I go to Latin America a lot, I go to Asia, I go to the Middle East, I go around a lot. And so many of these countries say, as some of my friends who are leaders in Latin America will say, you know, we'd much rather borrow money from Russia or China, especially China today, because they've never assassinated any of our leaders or fomented any coups. And I say, well, don't you think they will? And they say, well, maybe, but they haven't. They haven't built any military bases on our soil. Maybe they will in the future, but they haven't yet. And you have. The United States has. You know, you've done all those things, so you've proven that you're capable of doing that.
Yeah, and you know, coming from that place, I mean, obviously you were in Asia and in South America implementing some of these policies, some of these overthrows as well. Um, do you view the overthrow of the Ukrainian pro-Russian government to the pro-Western government as a similar kind of economic hit on that country?
Absolutely. The Ukrainian people spoke. They had an elected president. He stood up against us, and he sided with the Russians, and basically we got rid of him. It was a sort of a classic example, although it was done very subtly. And it's put Ukraine in a very, very difficult position. It's put the Ukrainian people in a very, very difficult position.
Extremely horrible economic situation that is forcing them to go towards the IMF and the World Bank as well, and pretty much what I call take their crack loans that take everything away from them. From your experience doing this and being one of the people who implemented this, where do you see everything going? When it comes to Greece, when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to Syria, there's so many different variables, there's so many different possibilities, but do you see things getting better or worse?
I want to see things getting better, and I see a tremendous opportunity here because I think what we've understood is that we've created a failed global economy. There's no question about that. Less than 5% of us live in the United States, and we consume almost 30% of the world's resources, while half the world's on the verge of starvation or starving. It's not a model. China can't repeat that. China's got 19% of the world's population. It doesn't pan out. Brazil, Russia, India, none of those places can repeat it. They're trying to, but it's a failed model. So we have to create a new model. And the old model, I call it a death economy. It's based on militarism, and it's based on ripping up the earth, destroying resources, basically, plundering, ravaging, raping the earth. We need to move into a new economy. I think this is a very exciting time for people in your generation because what you've got to recognize though is we can't fix the old economy. We've got to move into a new economy, what I call a life economy that's based on cleaning up pollution. The oceans are polluted, the rivers, the lakes all over the world are polluted, the air is polluted, the earth is polluted. There's a tremendous economy, a tremendous employment opportunity here to clean that up. Let's put our tax dollars toward that instead of toward military equipment. Let's create new technologies for transportation, communications, energy, banking, everything, the things that don't require tearing up the earth anymore. We've got all the resources we need. We just need to really understand how to reuse them and recycle them. And we can create a whole new economy here, which I call a life economy. I think it's very, very exciting, actually. There's tremendous opportunities.
I think it is, and I think we're living in very exciting times that we ourselves determine, and I'm excited to see where it goes. My last question would be, was there any kind of moment in your life that you decided to switch from one side to another? Was there any kind of spiritual kind of awakening? Was there any kind of moment in your life that you said, this is enough? What happened? Because that transition that you went through, living very luxuriously, doing the things that you were doing, to speaking out against it, takes a huge action. What made you take that action?
Well, there were a number of things, and I think to start with, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Amazon long before or just before actually I became chief economist, an economic hitman, and so that changed my view of the world. I think most people that had jobs like what I had, it was hard for them to see how wrong that system was. It took me a while because, after all, in business school we're taught that that's the right way to help countries, invest a lot of money in infrastructure, use our companies to build infrastructure, increase the economy. I was taught this. But as the deeper I got into it, I was only in that position for 10 years, but each year, each month, each week, I began to understand more and more how that system wasn't working the way we were being told it was working. Yes, GDP grew, but it was because the rich were getting very rich and the poor were getting much worse off. And then 10 years in, I rented a sailboat in the Virgin Islands, and I anchored it off the coast of St. John Island. Late in the afternoon, I rowed the dinghy ashore, and I went up to the ruins of an old sugarcane plantation. It was beautiful, covered with bougainvillea, and I'm sitting there looking out at the setting sunset, and it seems idyllic. And then suddenly I realized that this plantation has been built on the bones of thousands of slaves. And then I thought about, my God, the whole hemisphere has been built on the bones of millions of slaves. And then I had to admit that I was a slave. That, I wasn't going into remote villages and hauling people out in chains, but I was enslaving people with debt.
The heart of darkness.
And at that moment, I made the decision that I would never do it again, and I went back and quit. So that was one epiphany, one spiritual moment, and then another one was on 9/11. I was in the Amazon when that happened, but when I came home, I went to ground zero. And as I stood there, I knew I had to write the book. I knew I had to confess. I knew I had to expose the system that I'd been part of.
Thank you so much for being here at this conference with family members and rescue workers as well. Thank you for waking up. Your book inspired me when I was 14 years old. I read it and it helped me a part of the wake up. John, where can people find out more about you?
Well, go to my website, johnperkins.org. Sign up for my newsletter. You actually got to put your email address in there. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter, but the website is, I do trips, I do workshops. I do a lot of lectures, so I'd love to stay in touch with your people. Keep up your good work.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Hope you found this information insightful and helpful. If you did, click the like button. Don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to check out John Perkins' work. Read his books. Huge inspiration for me.